tonight. Now we're recording in progress, and we're also going to, in a moment, share up the.
Got to go back to the computer, Rabbi. Turn that off over there.
Oh yeah. I there's so many different things
Can
to
I
do.
figure that out?
Yeah, can you? Sure. If you want to take the Mary's going to do it, and you're without you, Mike. She's gonna. If you could just press that button that says "Got it."
Oh, that's scary if Mary's going to do it.
Mary, I can tell you, I have full confidence that Mary can do this. By the way,
Yes, so do
she
I.
can also hit the enter button. But yes, I think she can do it.
She's not techie.
She did it. Boom!
Wow.
She did it so quickly, and so
Yay.
she is a trained IT professional.
I've been trying to train her.
She's an IT. Well, you did it, Mike.
Battle.
Mike, you did it. You got her those skills. We have so many different buttons to press now, but we are we're getting it down to a science. Anyways, quick science. But yeah, though I'm not happy that the audio wasn't working as good, but I guess it is now. So and hopefully we'll be able to hear people in here as well. It seems like you're able to hear them. So I am going to make this a little bit bigger and make sure that everybody sees it. It's not quite the same on my screen as it is on.
Good size.
Yeah,
It's good on mine.
that's good. It all depends on what size your monitor is, right? But what I was going to say is it also depends on what happens here on our screen. Interestingly, stuff that I do on my screen doesn't.
I was looking at that.
Oh, you know why? Because I'd have to do it on the one in there. Anyways, today we're continuing the stories of Jacob and his return now back home, back to the land of Israel, and he is where we left him in the last part that we studied is the fact that when he comes back home, that he splits up his family in case Esau decides to take vengeance on him. And so what he basically says is that if I split up my family and Esau comes at me in vengeance, then maybe he'll only kill half my family. I mean, that's kind of a horrific calculation that somebody made. And I will tell you that it was a horrific calculation that Jews have had to make way too many times in history, where there were too many places where we lived, where if a government king, a priest decided that, it was time for the Jews to leave or to die, people had to go different places. And sometimes it meant the best calculation for having your family survive was to have them go to different places. Of course, that calculation was made 75, 80 years ago by people during the Holocaust who had to decide where to go, and in some cases, which family members would have the visa to get somewhere. And that really just happened in the last couple of generations. So this story is an ancient story, but unfortunately it's a timeless story, and it's happened too many times in Jewish history where there was a Jewish father, grandfather, a Jewish mom who had to decide who's gonna get the visa, who's gonna get the first train ticket, plane ticket, boat ticket out. And sometimes that was the only person who survived. So this is real. This was a real thing that happened too many times. So that's what Jacob does. He puts the children into different groups. So and we talked about the presents that he gives his brother, and that's kind of where we left it. And he stacks them up so that as the gifts come, that they'll be impressive. So as the presents keep coming, then Esau will be more and more impressed with him. And that's kind of where we left. And Jacob actually says, if I propitiate, which is a fancy way of saying if I give him a lot of stuff, if I buy him off, maybe he'll show me favor. And it says, the last thing that we read in verse 22 was, and so the gift went on ahead while he remained in the camp that night. And that was where we left off. And so today we start off here. That same night he arose, taking his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons. And he crossed the ford of the Yabok, which is the river that separates essentially Israel from Syria. And Jacob was left alone, and a figure wrestled with him until the break. If you look at the note, it says, or divine agent. The reason that divine is there is because it doesn't actually say the word divine. It's agent. Mary, what does your translation say? The King James.
Wrestled with a man.
Yeah. The word is ish. And again, that's a word for a man, for a human being. Right there, ish. Now, clearly, when Jacob wrestles with him, he appears to him as a man. And what happens in the scene, which is one of the most famous angel scenes, though it doesn't say he's an angel yet, is that when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me."
Oh, God.
Said the other, "What is your name?" He replied, "Jacob." And said he, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven," or again, sarita, which is translated as struggled or striven. What does the King James say? Right. Mary, what does it say for?
For as a prince hast out power with God and with men.
I don't know why I'm not hearing clearly.
Because Mary's pretty far away, wearing a mask, pretty far away. She said that it was, what's the word they used for
Prince.
striven?
Prince.
For as a prince.
Oh,
hast out power
so they
with God.
translated the word sarita as prince from the word sar in the King James. Really doesn't make sense from that context, but it is a strange word. It is definitely where the word Yisrael comes from, which is why it says right here, the first part is connected with Israel, Yisrael. The name Sarita, or the word Sarita, is connected to Israel. We usually understand that to be to wrestle with, to strive against, You strive against divine and human, im Elohim ve'im anashim, which is men, human beings. You wrestle with God, and you wrestled with human beings, and you have prevailed. You've won. So he tells him at this moment, you're not going to be called Jacob anymore. You're going to be called Yisrael, because you've striven with, well, the name Yisrael means to wrestle with God, but it's not just God. It's also with people. It says you wrestle with God and with people. So that's literally what Israel means. It's the one who struggles, who strives with God, who wrestles with God. That's why there are books that have to do with Jewish theology, where we'll call it wrestling with God, or God wrestling. There have been a few books with that title.
Is it verbal dialogue?
Well, it could be verbal too. Yeah, it could be philosophical. It could be the way we think about God. In this case, obviously, there's a physical struggling with God that happens. And there is no, according to this, there is no victor, in the sense that Jacob doesn't beat him, but he's still holding on to him the next day. And at that point, at least the angel says to him, you have prevailed, in the sense that you haven't let go. So what's interesting about this is, what is Jacob actually, like, did Jacob really win? Because, the angel says, I have to go, for dawn is breaking. Just let me go. We don't know why that is, because the angel can only be out night? Is it a vampire angel? Is it an angel can only be out at night? But there does seem to be something that happens the next day that the angel cannot be there anymore. So Jacob essentially won by holding on,
By debate.
by debate, and also you could say by not giving up.
Mhm.
And so it's not that he wins. He doesn't defeat the angel. The angel doesn't say, okay, you beat me now, or, get me out of the chokehold. You tap out, right? In wrestling, he didn't tap out. But he did say, I gotta go. We're done. And you have prevailed. So he does say you've won. But we could also say that Jacob won by not giving up.
Mhm.
And what's interesting about it is that becomes the theme for Jacob's life to some extent. What does Jacob do? He doesn't give up. He doesn't, no matter what happens to him. When his wife dies, which she's about, his wife that he loves, Rachel, is about to die, he doesn't give up. When he thinks his son Joseph is dead, he doesn't give up. So he doesn't let go. And what's interesting about that is that you could also say that's part of struggle. That's part of the struggle of life, that he doesn't get everything he wants. He doesn't get the crown, if you will, but he wins by not giving up. That's the lesson from it. The lesson from it is that he prevailed by, and again, you can say that's winning, or maybe just to prevail means you didn't lose, but I think it means that he won. The word tuchal has a connotation of you cross the finish line, that you've finished the race. There's something about that, obviously, that captured the imagination of people. It's been painted, it's been in a lot of artwork, statues of Jacob wrestling with the angel. And the fact that Jacob is given a new name, which to some extent is our name. It's not just Jacob's name, it's every Jew is Bnei Israel, is children of Israel.
Carly, you right?
Called a synagogue temple Israel. We don't call it temple Jacob. You could, there's synagogues that have Jacob in the title, but Jacob usually has a connotation of the guy Jacob. We don't call ourselves Bnei Yaakov, we call ourselves Bnei Israel, children of Israel. What is it about this name now that's different? Now, Yaakov has that meaning of holding on to the heel, right? Not letting go, which also is a similar idea, not letting go. But it also has this meaning of the heel, actually the heel of the foot, right? Which probably in Hebrew also had a connotation of being the heel. When you say somebody's being a heel. When you say today, right, someone is a heel, that's not a good thing. It's the same, it's the word, right? I'm talking about H-E-E-L, not H-E-A-L. Talking about a heel of your foot. When you say someone's a heel, it means they're not a good person, right?
Right.
Jacob as a name might have had that connotation. He's given that name because he holds his brother's heel as he's coming out of his mother's womb. He's holding on to Esau's heel, and he's called the heel, right? But there is this idea that he also is, Yaakov means to grab onto, to hold on to the heel. It's not just the fact that there's a heel, that he's trying to hold on. He's trying to get his brother. He's trying to get Esau. In this, the name is even more dramatic in the sense because he's saying he struggled with the divine. Even the divine, you have the audacity to struggle with the divine. And it's an appropriate name for the Jewish people who've always wrestled with big ideas, that have always essentially been taken upon ourselves to grapple with the biggest issues, the biggest ideas, the most complex issues of humanity. We're not afraid to wrestle with, including God.
And also wrestling with survival from the beginning of time,
Yep.
seems.
Yep. And I would argue that this is why, the Jewish people have been have been, have won so many Nobel Prizes and so have changed the world in so many ways. They've given the world so much because we're not afraid to wrestle with issues that other people would have otherwise avoided. But you can't be successful. You can't make an impact unless you're willing to get down and dirty and wrestle with these ideas. So
Persistently.
absolutely, persistently and with, to some extent, with a certain amount of audacity.
Mhm.
A certain amount of audacity to say, I can do this. And Jacob, our namesake, Israel now, is the person who set that tone for us. It's not just a matter of having faith in Judaism, it's also having the ability to question things and to be able to wrestle with these issues, to be open to the possibilities that we have to have dynamic and we have to accept these challenges. We have to look at what's happening and saying, can we do a better job? Can we fix this? It's really that kind of willingness to not just follow directions. Look, the Israeli army is the only army in the world that encourages junior officers to question their senior officers. It's a fact. And Israel has done it for a very long time. When people see the way the Israeli army functions, they sometimes, when other people from America and other countries from the West come and look at the way the Israeli army functions, they're shocked to see junior officers questioning their senior officers. And it's not like they reward it just for you to challenge somebody, but if you have another idea for how to conduct an engagement, an attack, or how to prevent an attack, they want to hear people. They want to hear from those people, and it was a lesson that Israel took from the Yom Kippur War, which was the biggest devastation that they ever suffered militarily, because in some cases they didn't listen to the junior officers, they didn't listen to some of the intelligence that they had, and people learned from that they're never going to simply rest on someone's rank. And if somebody knows something and it was actually dramatized in the television series that came out 2 years ago on Israel called the Yom Kippur War, called Valley of Tears, it showed how some of the junior officers in the Golan Heights were telling their senior officers, these tanks are really coming over, or this is really happening, and the senior officers in Israeli military leadership didn't believe it. And that's why actually Golda Meir was not prime minister for very long, because she was the prime minister during that debacle, and people in the military also lost their jobs too. So Israel encourages it like no other country. And it's another reason why it's been successful during this last generation of tech startups, because they've encouraged people to think outside the box and to constantly innovate, which in tech is the most important.
They were innovators, a lot of them.
Yeah. And tech is one of those fields where innovation is heavily rewarded and where it's encouraged. It's one of the reasons why Israel has been so successful in the last 25, 30 years, because they've constantly taken strides in innovation, technology. So it's worked out very well for Israel. So that goes back to Jacob. Now, Jacob's not done with the angel. Jacob says to the angel, Jacob asked, "Pray tell me your name." But he said, "You must not ask my name." And he took leave of them there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning I have seen a divine being face to face, yet my life has been preserved. So let's just take a moment with that. First of all, the angel, this divine being, does not share its name with Jacob. And says, I can't tell you. Don't ask me my name. But this is just, let's talk about angels for a second here, because people oftentimes ask, well, what do Jews believe about angels? Now, I will tell you that a lot of the angelology, a lot of the mythology about angels that we have in the West, amongst Christians especially, much of it came from Judaism. The names of the angels, the things that the angels do, a lot of that came from Judaism. It did. All the names you can think of that you've heard of for angels: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, these are all Hebrew names. Every angel that you can probably name has a Hebrew name. So how did we get from this line from the Torah, don't even ask me the name, to a whole lot of angels that have names? And they're Hebrew names. And Christians know the names, and Christians know the angels, and some of us, some Jews, know the angels too. But we definitely have a mixed feeling about angels when it comes to Jewish tradition, because the Torah itself, the 5 books of the Torah, do not name the angels. They're not named. And you're thinking about it going, well, wait, what about all those angels that we read about in Genesis already, even like the angel that stops Abraham from sacrificing Isaac? We read about that angel. We read about the angels right around that time that went down to Sodom and Gomorrah to see what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. We don't have their names. So what's going on here? How do we have all this literature that has these names? Well, there was a point in time in Jewish history where angelology and names for angels became not only accepted, but pretty well known. The Torah recognizes, and again, I think you can see, we've seen it for those who've read beyond, because we were reading about angels. For example, on our Tuesday class, we were reading about angels in the story of Samson. We eventually, by the way, for a long period of time, through most of King David's reign and King Saul, King David, all the way through the kings, we don't see a lot of angels. The angels don't make a lot of appearances. They make some. There's a few sightings, angel sightings, but not like there was in Genesis. Not like there was in Exodus. Because in Exodus, it basically says there was an angel in the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. That was an angel. There was an angel in front of the people for 40 years. They were always in the presence of an angel, a messenger of God, a manifestation of God in this world. They were with it all the time. But we do get to a period where there's not. When we start to get angels named, we're talking about the very, very last books of the Bible. The first time we see an angel, I wouldn't say historically, but for a character that we know of when he lived, was Daniel. The book of Daniel, we read about the angel Michael, who's one of the most famous Jewish angels. He is, if you will, the patron angel of the Jewish people, Michael. But it's very, very new, the book of Daniel, compared to this in Genesis. We're talking about literally 700, 800 years after this passage that we're reading right now is the book of Daniel. Because you got to remember, the Bible covers 1,000 years of literature. The Bible, our Hebrew Bible, covers 1,000 years of writing, of stories. It's amazing. I mean, I tell people all the time, when you think about that, that's like literally talking about Chaucer and early English writing from 1,000 years ago, which we barely understand. Beowulf and stuff like that, we can't even understand their English. Forget Shakespearean English, which was 500 years ago, talking about language that changes over 1,000 years. And what was accepted 1,000 years later. So if in Genesis, angels, you're not even supposed to ask their names, and then by the book of Daniel, we have an angel named. And then, of course, people are going to ask, well, what about Satan? What about the angel who is the advocate against us? Satan is mentioned in the book of Job. And so you can make the argument, and definitely it is the case in Job, that Satan is an angel. He appears before God as an angel, as the accusing angel, the angel we don't like, because the angel is the angel who comes to God and says, look at all these bad things these people are doing. It's only later on that Satan actually initiates or encourages or makes us do bad things. But originally, Satan is simply the one who encourages God to judge us harshly, which means we don't really like Satan, which is why we probably laid on a lot of other stuff about him. But originally, Satan really figures as only as God's accusing angel, or again, accusing us. So there are not a lot of angels, and Job was a fairly late book too in the Bible, as far as.
Did they become the later day apostles in the Christian religion?
Yeah. So by Christianity, by the time of Christianity, which is about 150 years after the book of Daniel, and definitely at the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which there's a new National Geographic on the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's out. I haven't really looked at it. I just got it today. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see lots of angels. And that's just before Christianity. That's just before the rise of Jesus and Christianity. By that period of time, angels are not only named, like as we said in the book of Daniel, but within 150 years, during the time of Jesus, angels are being invoked all over the place. And part of the issue, of course, is that angel worship and angel mythology takes away from God. And so Genesis seems to be very cognizant of that by saying we don't even talk about their names. Later on, Jews don't feel as uncomfortable with that. So what happens? What happened to allow for that?
Tell us.
And we don't see angels now. I don't know people
Well,
who see angels.
So part of the reason that we talk about that today, and again, for people, as Carol mentioned, for people, especially Christians, or in particular for Mormons who believe that angels were manifesting themselves in America of all places, that Angels in America, by the way, was Tony Kushner's play, Angels in America, which was also brought in some of the Mormon theology. The issue is that Judaism definitely stopped feeling as comfortable with angels as Christians who are developing at that time started talking about the same thing. Now, part of it was because, again, because when Christians started doing it, it started to feel a little uncomfortable. A lot of the angelology of Judaism then transferred into, and we saw it in Christianity develop as reverence for saints, for individual saints.
Mhm.
Saints started taking on a lot of the roles that the angels had, and people started invoking the saints the way people used to invoke angels.
Got it.
Part of what happens with this, which we see here in this text, is that angels can be what the Torah seems to be saying here, and what Jews later believe, is that if you invoke angels by name, you have power over them. So part of how you control an angel or invoke an angel is by saying its name.
Oh,
This angel maybe, again, I'm not saying this is definite, is that the angel doesn't want to be named, because once Jacob knows its name, then Jacob can control that angel, can invoke that angel, can bring that angel into his control, or even to make him manifest, for him to appear before him by calling out this angel's name. So maybe knowing their names was actually part of that control, if you will, over the angels. So angels, by the early Christian period, though, Jews feel comfortable invoking these angels. So what happened? I will tell you that what I think happens, what other people who kind of speculate on why this happened, is that interestingly, I think it'll make sense to you. During the biblical period, the early biblical period, this time when Genesis is happening and taking place, and for the first few hundred years of Israelite history, Jews were competing and living amongst pagans who believe in lots of gods.
Mhm.
And so Judaism is very careful not to do things like
To have one God.
do anything that takes away from God. So invoking angels by name will really be problematic for people who are saying, what's the difference between invoking an angel and invoking a deity, a God?
Mhm.
Not doing anything different. By the Greco-Roman period, now again, you're going to say, well, Romans and Greeks believed in lots of gods. It's true, they did. But interestingly, by the period of time when they're coming into contact with Jews, that type of worship of polytheism amongst the Greeks and Romans was already declining, which is
Mhm.
one of the reasons why Christianity started taking off amongst the Greco-Roman people, was because they were already not worshiping the gods. It was already a problem that Roman citizens were not taking part in the sacrifices and were not worshiping Jupiter, Zeus. They weren't worshiping Juno and Apollo and all those other gods and goddesses. They weren't doing it. And so I think Judaism, to some extent, and during this period, is like, we're not threatened by polytheism anymore. We're not threatened by these people. And quite frankly, a lot of them start becoming Jewish and Christian. There's a huge movement of Romans that accepted Judaism, that were converting to Judaism during the time of Christianity. The reason that so many people eventually become Christian in the Roman Empire is because they knew about Judaism and they knew about the Bible, because they were learning it, they were studying it. And Christianity really, to some extent, built on, I wouldn't say conversionary activity, because we don't have a lot of it. We have some evidence that there were rabbis and Jewish teachers that were going around converting pagans to Judaism. It even comes from within the Christian Bible, by the way, it talks about Jews converting pagans. But there was still a problem that Judaism had, which was there were a whole lot of rules. And when Christianity came and basically provided an ethical monotheism devoid of a lot of mitzvot, a lot of commandments, it made it very attractive. And so what we think is that Jewish theology, or that Jewish ethical monotheism, at least, people were cool with that. They liked the idea of only having one God. They didn't really like the idea of keeping kosher. They didn't really like the idea of circumcising. They didn't really like the idea of necessarily having to keep Shabbat. But when it came to treating people nicely, having a God who loves them and who isn't playing games with them, they liked it. And Christianity really built on that. And to some extent, you can make the argument that Judaism and Christianity, the angelology felt very comfortable to people who had maybe transferred over from their polytheism and saying, oh, you mean there's an angel who heals us? I mean, I can invoke the angel Raphael, the healer of God. That's what the name Raphael means. I can invoke Raphael instead of Asclepius, the god of healing. And oh, okay, all I have to do is shift the name. Oh, I'm okay with that. And I think that angelology really found a fertile ground amongst Jews and pagans, and now Christians, who felt very comfortable with having one God, but maybe delegating things to a bunch of helpers. The Torah itself, in the 5 books, when we talk about the 5 books of Moses, going through Deuteronomy, when we have our mitzvot, you will not find angels doing anything that isn't directly ordered by God. There is no invoking an angel for your own private bidding. And to the contrary, we have a line like this, which says, I'm not even going to tell you, don't even ask me my name. You're going to get nothing from me. So that's what we have here. And again, it shows you the development of angels. Obviously, this is an issue which I find fascinating. And I find it fascinating because I love mythology. I love pagan mythology. I love Jewish mythology. I love all kinds of mythology, because I think mythology is really the way that we tell our stories. And of course, in the process, tell you what our values are, what we're concerned about, what scares us, what frightens us, what motivates us. And I will tell you, the only difference today in our world is that we've stripped our mythology of a lot of the meaning that it used to have. But I still like it. And don't get me wrong. The reality is we don't call them angels anymore. We call them superheroes. And our fascination, our obsession with superheroes, our obsession with Marvel and DC today, to some extent, mirrors the lack of discussion about angels and saints that people have. And so, you can talk to kids, and I don't mean kids, I'm talking about people in their 30s, and they'll rattle off every one of the Avengers and every one of the X-Men and everyone tell you all the powers. I got news for you. 2 or 3 generations ago, people would rattle off the angels and the saints. And they had a whole list of powers that they would tell you that this deity or this saint that they had would have. And they, some of the stories were great stories about the saints or about angels, but we've replaced them with superheroes. We've replaced our mythology with, this new type of mythology. And again, I would say I love it, it's entertaining, but it's not really meaningful. It doesn't actually help us kind of think about the bigger issues. Sometimes they do. I'm not gonna say there's not meaning to any of the superhero movies, but let's face it, the great superhero movies are essentially how many things explode and how great the drama and the humor and those kinds of things go on within whether we like this character, who's playing who, what actor's playing what. It's not really the mythological story. No, sometimes it's there, and sometimes those are really powerful stories. But the mythology actually is super important. It's nothing that anyone should dismiss as silliness, because whether you're talking about angels or you're talking about saints or you're talking about demigods or you're talking about superheroes, you're not really talking about any of that. You're talking about what are your values, what scares you, what excites you, what do you want to be, what do you aspire to be. Those are all within the mythology. We just have to acknowledge it. Look, I'm not making this up. That's what Freud wrote about. Freud completely grounded his psychoanalysis on Greek myths. Everybody knows that. That's not a secret. I'm saying he was right. I'm just saying that the father of psychoanalysis based his work on Greek myths, on Oedipus, on Electra, on the stories that people knew from in his generation that were trained in the classics, that knew this. So it only worked for him to tell those stories and for him to teach those lessons because people knew them, and you have to use what people know. So again, I find it fascinating, but I find it fascinating because, again, it's not just entertainment. It actually teaches us who we are and what we're thinking about. So the angels that Jacob sees, the angels that we see, what are we learning from them today? Interestingly, as we read the last 2 lines, Jacob is forever changed by it. The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, the place, again, here it's called Peniel, meaning I have seen divine face. The Penel, the face of God, right? It's the word panim is the word for punim, right? As the Hebrew Yiddish panim el panim. I've seen divine face to face. And here it's Penuel. It's a slightly, if you really want to know, it was a scribal error. The yud here was written longer in one of the became a vav, and then that's why it became Penuel. But we know it as Peniel, and it's not a different place. It's obviously the same place, but it means I've seen God face to face. Panim El, the face of God. By the way, the word panim is a plural word. Panim is or punim is a Hebrew word. It's a plural. Now we don't have faces, right? We don't have more than one face. Well, maybe we do, but we have a face. And it is interesting that sometimes words have a plural construction, but it doesn't mean that they're plural. The word right next to it is Elohim. Elohim is a plural word. God is not plural, but the word for God in Hebrew is a plural word, Elohim. But it's always a singular word. It's always a singular verb. But the construct, the way it's constructed is a plural. But so is the word panim. And we never say faces. Panim is always a face. Okay? So just so you know, when people say, but Elohim is plural. Yes, and so is the word panim, and it's right there, right next to it. There's other Hebrew words like that. I just wanted to show you that there's two that are right next to each other. The one that everyone talks about, Elohim, panim. Anyways, so what happens though? The sun rose upon it as he passed Peniel, and he's limping on his hip. He's limping. So when that angel touched the socket of his hip, he took his hip out. He dislocated it. Limping now. And it says, that is why the children of Israel to this day do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the socket of the hip, since Jacob's hip socket was wrenched at the thigh muscle. Now, here's an interesting question. Did Jacob walk with a limp for the rest of his life? Very possible. Very possible he never walked without a limp ever again. Which means he's essentially disabled from this experience.
So he deserves a handicap sticker.
He got a handicap sticker. Yes, he gets a blue sticker for his horse, for his mule. Yeah, it's very possible that this was a life-altering, physically altering experience for him too, not only a mental altering. So Jacob has seen angels a few times. He saw an angel when he left, and now he sees an angel and wrestles with the angel on his way home. And his experiences both times change his life, but they also, to some extent, change everyone's life. Because the reason it says that Jewish people don't eat the meat around the thigh muscle is because of this. So some of you have wondered, why is filet mignon not kosher?
That's why.
That's why.
Yeah, that's why.
Because
I
of
love filet.
Jacob. It's all because of Jacob's wrestling with an angel. So that whole hindquarter of an animal,
I thought.
it's not just that, the fillet. It's
It's a certain point of your rib that you cannot eat from. Goes down so many ribs, doesn't it?
I'll show you.
Okay.
Listen, I'm telling you right now, this knocks out a huge part of the cow for the Jewish people.
Is it dry?
Yes, I know.
Tri-tip, yeah, it's one of those. I'm going to show you. No, I'm going to show you right now. Why not? I'm going to pop
She's
it up
never
here.
eaten a hot dog again.
I
And she
will.
read what's in it.
So here, I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you right now. So
What's in there?
we can only eat half a cow. We can eat the front part of a cow. So I'm going to show you an image of this. Yeah, I'm looking for here we go. You always want to see this. Yeah, as a vegetarian, no part of the cow is I can eat. So,
Yeah,
but
but you would like it.
I did have a cow. I enjoyed the cow at some point in my life. I will show you though.
How
It's
about
not
pork?
just
No.
here. I'm going to share it right now. You're going to see. Here we go. It's going up on the big screen.
Yeah. right.
So there you go. It's not just the It's not just the fillet, right?
So
It's
it's the
the,
whole green part.
it's the sirloin, the tenderloin, the short loin, the flank, the round, and the shank.
All the good meat.
All the
That's
good
not
meat,
so
right?
wrong.
What is still kosher, folks? The rib,
Sirloin is
the
better.
chuck, which is not the good part of the cow, I guess, right?
No.
The chuck, no one wants that. The plate, I didn't even know there was such a thing, but that's like the front part of the flank. The shank, the front shank, and of course,
The brisket,
what we all love, the brisket.
yes, the
You
brisket.
can see the brisket. So the brisket on the front is on the front side. And the sirloin back here, the part that people would much prefer to eat, is back here. So you can see it's quite a lot of the cow. It's not eligible for eating. It means that when Jews would slaughter a cow, a whole lot of it went to somebody else.
Right.
The Christians.
Their Gentile neighbors got to eat a
Yeah.
lot of stuff.
Wow.
It's pretty wild, right?
Yeah.
It's a good half of the cow.
This I knew.
So I will, this I knew.
Yeah.
So for
I'm
people,
sorry.
for people who love cows and love their meat, it is an interesting thing. But if you ever wondered why brisket, why did brisket become the thing? It's because it's from the kosher. It's from one of
And
the
so
few
then
parts
how-
that we can
so how
actually
did
eat.
we get around to tri-tip?
How do we get around a tri-tip?
Yeah. Is tri-tip all right?
I don't think so. I think tri-tip is a part of a sirloin. You're asking, this
I
is,
know you're vegetarian.
this is something that I
Just
don't-
tell her am I?
even when I knew this stuff, I didn't know this stuff, because I loved meat, cow, not all meat, but I loved eating beef so much that I didn't really care. I didn't even care where it came from. Nobody says that. I never said, hey, I'm not eating that part of the cow. I didn't like tongue. I never liked
Oh,
tongue.
no, yeah,
I didn't like tongue. I know that was it was a big thing for Jews to eat. Yes.
No,
The tri-tip comes
smell
from the bottom sirloin. It's a sirloin
it.
cut.
Okay,
So there you go. So that's why tri-tip is not, because it's a sirloin cut.
so you're
Uh,
right.
Huh?
So,
So you're-
well, wait a second. It's not trafe. It's not trafe.
Right.
It's not trafe. Trafe literally is referring to animals that you can't eat. I mean, it's trafe from the standpoint of you're not supposed to, it's not traditionally eaten, but it's not from the list of animals that you're not supposed to eat. It's from this section of the Bible, which says we don't eat this. So as Francine just said, I bet most Jews do not know this today. Yes, that is correct. But Jews who were keeping kosher, well, look, it
Do
didn't-
Orthodox Jews omit that whole half?
Oh, yeah. So if you go to, see, here's the issue. If you go to a kosher butcher, you'll never find those cuts there. So it was never,
Oh.
it wasn't like you had to worry about it because no kosher butcher and no kosher restaurant would ever serve that.
Wait a minute, I
So you
gotta
never-
go.
But what would the kosher butcher do with half the cow?
They would give it to the,
Yeah,
to
but
the-
this is-
they give it to their Gentiles.
Gentiles.
They give it to Gentiles.
Joyce,
Honestly,
have you ever made chicken soup?
you make
Joyce?
chicken soup?
I never knew that before.
She never knew what about chicken soup.
Well, no, what were you gonna say about chicken soup?
I want to know if she used a kosher chicken. You only make chicken soup with a kosher chicken.
Well, wait a second. So kosher chicken, there's no part, I want to make it very clear. There's no part of a chicken that you can't eat, right?
That's true.
This law only applies to cows.
That's true.
Oh,
So
But
it's
we
not
kill a chicken differently.
correct. So a chicken is very easy to shecht the chicken, as we call it. Shechting is slaughtering, right? So if you shecht a chicken, all you have to do is cut off its head. It's very simple. So there's no jugular vein you have to worry about. You don't have to worry about what part of it you don't eat.
We slit their throat and let the blood drain down.
Correct. So you drained it of its blood, but you didn't have to, ever worry about what part of the chicken you ate.
No, but you can't make chicken soup without kosher chicken.
Okay, well, that's the ruling. The ruling from Joanne is you have to use kosher. Now, part of the reason why you probably say that is because it's so salty that it makes the chicken soup much better because you have
It's
so much
fatter
salt.
too.
It's got fat.
If
got
you use
schmaltz.
Amish chicken, it's terrible.
Oh, you don't get an Amish
An Amish chicken, we're having, that
There's
we,
no flavor.
Joyce, did you ever encounter Amish chickens when you lived in Michigan? Did you encounter an Amish chicken in Michigan? Joyce?
No,
Okay, so I guess there's a discussion now that our Michigan people say that you should never use an Amish chicken
No.
for chicken soup. So that's an
It's
important,
tasteless.
Has
it's an
no
important,
flavor.
it's an important ruling that they don't have good flavor. I did not know that. So
I didn't know that either.
we learned something
They
today.
have no fat under the skin.
Right.
That's it. They work out their
And
chickens.
The only way you can make it taste good is if you put an extra seasoning.
Okay,
No,
So,
loud.
so the new class is Jewish Cooking 101?
that's right.
Yes.
And we also, as Francine pointed out, that we learned a little Yiddish today too, because now people know that punim is actually a Hebrew word. You know a little Hebrew by just knowing the
Face.
word punim, by just knowing the word
Shana
punim.
put 'em.
Shana punim. Well, the interesting thing about that phrase, there's a little German in that and a little Hebrew, right? Because
Uh-huh.
Shana is shoin is German for pretty,
And what about?
but
Shana-
punim is Hebrew. So Shana,
Well, no, what about Shana Ketzel? I
that,
told you, my cat's name was Shana Ketzel.
that is all Yiddish. That's all German.
Yeah.
Shana Madel is also all German. There's no Hebrew in that.
Huh.
Madel is the German
So
maid.
it's all
It's-
Yiddish.
So it's all German. It's all that part. But Yiddish, which is a real combination of Hebrew and German, and a word like Shana Punim has a little bit of Hebrew and a little bit of German. And it's a perfect example. Just like we say good Yontif, right? Good Yontif is good is German, whereas Yontif, Yom Tov, is Hebrew. So we combine both. We combine both. I will tell you another Shana though. Shana de Lavona, right? As pretty as the moon.
Mhm.
That phrase, Shana, the German, and Lavana is the moon in Hebrew. So sometimes you have Hebrew and Yiddish and German together,
Oh
and
my.
that's the perfect Yiddish word, is one that has a little Hebrew and a little German. So those phrases that have a little bit of both, that's really when you get to see Yiddish at its best. But about 70% of Yiddish is German, so there's not going to be that much Hebrew in it. You get some of those words that it's fun because then you see a little bit of Hebrew in it. So, all right. So now we're in the next chapter. We learned about why we don't eat sirloin, why we don't eat any of the really good cuts of meat. That's why, because of Jacob wrestling with an angel. If Jacob had only not wrestled with an angel, he could have eaten a sirloin and not well, look, you don't feel guilty about it, but anyways, you wouldn't have even known. This seems, by the way, more of a custom than it does.
What?
It does seem like a little bit more of a custom than it does seem a
Oh,
law.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And, oh, very nicely, Francine said the best chicken soup is using what Tracy uses for her soup, adding some chicken, onion, parsley, and parsnip. So what she's talking about is the fact that my wife uses a vegan chicken stock, but what Francine did was she took the vegan chicken stock and then put chicken in it. And she's probably right, because that is the best way of getting the flavor, the crazy flavor that they use in those fake chicken stocks.
She was
then-
what first?
Fake chicken stock. It's a fake chicken,
Yeah, but she's vegan.
but she never puts in the real chicken stock. So what she's saying is, Francine's saying is if you use some chicken and then use the fake chicken stock, you actually get both. You get a little bit of
Oh,
both.
stop.
So
Yeah,
yeah, it's a
stock.
fake chicken
You
stock.
can use soup today.
True. But there is this vegan chicken stock, which is very flavorful and has lots of flavors in it. And I think she's right. That probably is a good way to make chicken soup. So there you go. Francine's tweaking my wife's vegetarian recipe to make something delicious for herself and her family. So thank you. I guess, I don't know. One day we hope that there'll be an adequate fake chicken source. It would also taste good. Anyways, so back to the story and back to the action, because we had a little dream, if you will, not a dream really, but it's a little bit of action with the angel, which is Jacob's experience. And it's only Jacob now Israel's experience, but we also now have the story of Esau that's going on in the background. Now it says, looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming with a retinue of 400. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids. putting the maids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last.
So they had maids back then.
And these maids,
Yes.
What's
We're-
different than slavery?
what is the difference of slavery? Well, these two maids were women that he had had children with, Bilhah and Zilpah.
Yeah.
So these are women that as maids, they're actually lower down wives. They were wives that were not the same as Leah and Rachel, but are
Baby machines.
a little bit. Now, here's the interesting thing. They get to go first, which means if anyone's getting killed, they're the first to get killed.
Well, that's
But-
why you put them first.
That's why he put him there.
Yeah.
And you see the priority of what he did. He put his more beloved wife, Rachel, in the very back by him and his son Joseph. Very much at the end, which means that by the time that Esau and his crew would attack them, that the least likely people to get killed would be Joseph and Rachel,
Why?
because he cared about them the most.
Cared about them more.
Oh, I thought you said most likely.
No,
No,
they're
no.
the most, those would be the ones who'd be saved. So what he did is he put his most precious thing in the back, right? The people he wanted to get hurt the least.
Actually,
Now,
the person he really loved, you know.
now here's the weird thing. Now you say, well, that's pretty heartless, right? Well, I guess. Look, he himself went on ahead and bowed low to the ground 7 times until he was near his brother. So what he does is he goes up first. So it's not like he stayed back at the very end with his wife Rachel and his son Joseph that he loved. And by the way, this is the first indication we have that he loves Joseph the most. Now we know it because we've read the story before and we've seen Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. We know all about Joseph. But here is the first time that we've seen what we always kind of suspected that would happen with Rachel's only son at this point. She's gonna have another one, Benjamin. But right now, this is the only son that Rachel has. He's already, you can see, he's his father's favorite. This is the first time we see that. The first time. And people forget that because we read about his coat in a little bit. Coat that he gives his son. But this is the first thing he does. He tries to save him, protect him. But he goes up first, which means he's the most likely to be killed right now. He's by himself. He himself went on ahead by himself. By himself. And it says he bowed low 7 times. So assumedly, like he took a few steps, he bowed low. He took another few steps, he bowed low. And he did it 7 times. He's showing his humility a bunch of times before his brother. So now what is going to happen? He's already given him his gifts. He's now showing up in front of his brother. And by the way, here it seems like everyone's together. He hasn't split apart anybody because according to this, all the family meets at the same time. So if he split them up, he reconstituted them. At least the way that this tells us it happens. And now it says Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him and falling on his neck, he kissed him and they wept. Now, this dramatic scene, one of the most dramatic scenes in the Bible, whole Bible, is a moment where we're not sure what's going to happen. Because the last time these two guys saw each other, Esau said, the next time I see him, I'm going to kill him.
Oh, yeah.
Gonna kill him.
So that's the last thing that Esau said to him before he left. Essentially, I'm going to kill him. Because he's stolen his blessing. He's stolen now his, his blessing, his birthright. He's stolen everything from him. And now what's going to happen? Now, we know that it is possible for a brother to kill another brother because the very first brothers in history were Cain and Abel. and Cain killed his brother Abel. He killed him. So is it possible? Yeah, it's not only possible, it happened from the very beginning. The beginning of brothers, the very first brothers, one kills the other. So it's very possible that this is going to happen.
Who did the killing, the first brother or the second?
Cain killed Abel, right? So Cain was the first brother and he killed his brother Abel. Now, what's happening here? Because it says that Esau ran to greet him. And it says he embraced him. And then it says he fell on his neck. Now, the next words are he kissed him and then he wept. There's a few things that happen. There's several verbs actually that happen here. He runs, he embraces him, he falls on his neck, he kisses him, and they weep. That's the first thing that they do together. They wept.
So he kissed him, killed him, and left.
Now, I will tell you, you make an interesting point. There is an understanding that when he embraces him and falls on his neck, up until that moment, Esau's not sure what he's going to do. And so there's an interesting, a bunch of dots that you see above this word, which is kissed him. Vayashakehu in Hebrew, Vayishakehu. But there's a whole bunch of dots up here,
That's-
right? And the reason for that is that we chant that in a very unusual way when we read the Torah, when we sing the Torah. Why? Because at the moment that he kissed him, there was uncertainty whether that was going to be a kiss or whether that was going to be a bite. He's literally going to bite his neck.
Like a dog.
Because he doesn't kiss him on his head, on his face. He doesn't kiss him on his face. Kisses him on the neck. Which is a weird place to kiss somebody. The rabbis recognize that. The sages who read this recognize it. I think everyone recognizes it. What is falling on someone's neck? That's the Hebrew. Vayipol al tzavara. Right there. He fell on his neck. That's not a normal thing to do when you kiss somebody. And so there is this understanding that, like, even at that last moment, because when it says he ran to him and he embraced him, the word for embracing can also be grabbing, holding on. Doesn't have to be a loving embrace. So running after him, which is, you know, in the right context, it's beautiful.
Choked him.
But running after someone and falling on their neck, or grabbing them and falling on their neck, and everything that happens up until that moment could be violent. Very scary. And was it scary for Jacob until that very moment that the kiss comes instead of the bite? Because if he bites him on his neck, he could kill him.
But he did.
Well, it didn't kill him. When he kissed him. And then they weep. Look, there are people who point out that when Jacob gets grabbed by his brother, that it reminds them a lot of the wrestling with the angel. That when he wrestles with him, that moment when he's grabbed by the angel was very similar to this. There's even a midrash, there's even an understanding, a teaching, that it wasn't an angel that he wrestled with. That was actually an early meeting with his brother Esau. Now, again, was it a meeting with Esau? Some people say it was with Esau's angel in particular, that this is a wrestling with angels, but every person has their own guardian angel, and that maybe this was Esau's angel, and that wrestling with him allowed him to have that, not wrestle with him, but an embrace. And he essentially won over Esau's angel. It's a
Maybe he
mystical, it's a
choked him.
mystical idea. Go ahead. What were you saying here?
Maybe he choked him and the maid out of it.
He could have. He could have choked him. That's the fear, is that he could have choked him. This is what is at stake at this moment, is that Jacob could have died. He's completely vulnerable at that point. But instead, he forgives him. And here's what he says. Esau says to him, looking about, he saw the women and the children. Who, he asked, are these with you? He answered, the children with whom God has favored your servant. And notice what he says, your servant. He calls himself his, again, saying to Esau, I am your servant. Avdecha, I'm your slave, I'm your servant. And then the maids with their children came forward and bowed low. Next, Leah with her children came forward and bowed low. And last, Joseph and Rachel came forward and bowed low. They bowed down. So everybody is showing Esau this respect. Now, Jacob told him what to do. I mean, he told him, this is what we got to do to come back home. We got to make peace with Esau. And they all did it. And look at what happens next. He asked, what did you mean by all this company which I have met? He answered, to gain my Lord's favor. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours. But Jacob said, no, I pray you, if you would do me this favor, accept from me this gift. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably. And so here we have the word over and over again used, favor. To gain the Lord's favor, that I have gained your, let me gain your favor. Matzati chen be'einecha, that's the Hebrew phrase. Matzati chen be'einecha. Let me find favor in your eyes. And the word chen, that's the word for favor, right? And here you once again have Asher Hanan Elohim, the word favor, that God has favored your servant, right? Hanan, that's the word. Hana means favor or grace that somebody has been given, right? So the name Hannah, that's what the name Anna, Joanna comes from. Yochanan means the favor of God. So Hannah, that's you. So Hannah, that's what it means. It means grace or favor, God's favor. So he says, I want you to favor me. I want you to also favor me. God has favored me, and I want you to favor me. So he says, I'm giving you all this so that you favor me, that you show me compassion, you show me your grace. And because he says, I don't need this, I'm fine, I got lots of stuff. He says, nope, I want you to take this as a gift from me. It's very clear with him. I want you to have this. You need to take this from me. So what's so interesting about this phrase that he says is, again, over and over again, do me this favor. Matzati chen be'einecha, again, the same phrase. And he says, to see you is like seeing the face of God. And here we have again, to see your face, ati panecha, to see your panim, to see your face, is like seeing Panei Elohim, which is what the place was called, Panei El. And so the same phrase, to see the face of God, he is saying, seeing your face, brother, is like seeing the face of God. I've seen God's face. I've seen you again.
But it's threatening to him.
He feels in this moment now that if his brother is going to accept him, it's literally like seeing God. And what's interesting about this is that Jacob's essentially saying, I see God's face in my brother. My brother, who, as we know about Esau, is not a wonderful guy, right? There's
It's a bad.
there's definitely bad, he definitely does bad things, right? We don't know what he's been doing for the last 20 years. We haven't really caught up with Esau yet. Jacob's told him, I've had all these wonderful things. I have all these kids, I have all this stuff. I'm doing great. He says, God's given me great stuff. But what does he see in his brother's face? That he now, his twin brother, by the way, but a twin brother who hated him. But by seeing his face now, he sees God's face. And what's so powerful about this, again, is that the place is called Peniel because he sees the face of God in wrestling with the angel, but he also sees the face of God in his brother. And what he sees, of course, is forgiveness. He sees the face of God in his brother, forgiving him finally.
What kind of that?
This is probably one of the biggest lessons in Genesis, and maybe the biggest lesson, one of the biggest lessons in the Torah, is that we can't exist as human beings. We can't exist in this world unless we have forgiveness. There's no way,
Forgiveness.
and there's no way for humanity. There's no way for us to survive as a people unless we can forgive. And so when he says, I see the divine, I see God in your face. And he says, you've received me favorably. You've seen, you've looked at me favorably. And that is, again, this understanding that
It seems psychologically, it's absolutely essential, because if you don't forgive, you live in the past, you cannot go on to the future, you cannot move forward. If you're not forgiving, you live in the past and relive it over and over and over again.
And hence the 12 steps
12 steps. Well, 12 steps are definitely about,
of Eleanor, of alcohol.
yeah, 12 steps of the anonymous and Alcohol Anonymous and
It's
all
all
those groups.
about forgiveness.
Yes, forgiveness is a concept that I think the Jewish people have helped give the world. And of course, we talk about it, people talk about it a lot in Christianity, but the reality is that Genesis teaches us
Yes,
that if we can get to a point of forgiving, then we can have a family, we can succeed as a society, but we can only have those kinds of relationships if we allow ourselves and encourage in others the ability to forgive.
yes.
It's impossible.
And it's funny, forgiving doesn't mean we condone it, that it was right, that it was okay. It's that we forgive it and now we can move forward.
You let it go.
And we don't forget it. We don't forget.
No, you can't forget.
But what we really do is we recognize, essentially, when we forgive somebody, that especially if they've made an effort, is that we recognize the potential for change. Because if we don't allow someone the opportunity to be, again, they could let us down. It's possible. But if we don't give them an opportunity to be forgiven, what happens is that there is no potential for change. Because we're basically saying you can't change. And even if they might not be
That's
able,
right.
might not be able to, but they'll essentially be closed off from ever being able to change if they're not given an opportunity to be forgiven.
And that's for sins of commission and sins of omission, and includes forgiving the self for whatever happened before.
And are we supposed to forgive the Nazis for what they did to us?
Well, it's interesting because there's an interesting discussion. Simon Wiesenthal actually has a discussion about it. He had a book called Sunflower, which was about this idea of whether you could forgive a Nazi. And I mean, he's talking about it from his own personal experience. And you know, part of forgiveness, you know, one of the interesting things that I tell people about this, not just for the Holocaust, but you know, what we obviously, that's the paramount example of man's inhumanity. Somebody has to ask for forgiveness. You know, when we say, can I forgive that person? Well, did they make any attempt to seek forgiveness? I mean, you know, look, anyone has a right to forgive somebody for anything. But if somebody hasn't asked for forgiveness, I would argue you really can't get, you can't give forgiveness if somebody hasn't asked for it, right? So if somebody hasn't taken responsibility for what they've done, then how can you forgive them? I mean, and it goes to yourself too. I mean, how can you forgive yourself if you haven't acknowledged what you've done? If you're living
Well,
in the world that
it's
you-
not forgiving them to their face, and it's not forgiving them because they ask for it. It's for yourself to move past. You made mistakes, but I forgive you. I'm not going to live in the past and carry my resentment.
there's no
Joyce, I disagree with you. I don't think that's considered forgiveness. You're moving past it, yeah, but you're not forgiving that person. I'm in that same position. I talked to Mark about this a couple of years ago. And you just have to move past it. No forgiveness at all. That's my feeling, at least.
Well, see,
You're the
when you're talking
professional.
about forgiving Nazis, that is a broad subject. I'm talking about people you
No, I
know.
understand that. I'm
People-
talking about a specific person, Joyce,
Oh.
and you just have to move past it. And that's what I did. But you're the professional. I'm not a professional.
I have to do it before Yom Kippur.
Well, look, I'm gonna tell you, look, if somebody hasn't asked for forgiveness, and look, I'm gonna go on record with this because it's already public knowledge, and she's talked about it, and I've talked about it, and we've talked about it in this very room. So a few years ago, when Kim Goldman wrote her last book about her own experience, you know, 25 years after her brother was murdered by OJ, you know, one of the things we talked about
It was never convicted.
was whether she could forgive him. And one of the things and we talked about this for those who are here, I think somewhere it's recorded. I should probably post it now that we have a YouTube channel. We had a discussion about it, and you know, she was confronted by people oftentimes over these last decades who told her she should forgive him and that she should move on. And the issue that she has, and again, a lot of times she felt that these were people who were preaching to her as Christians who said she should forgive, is that she felt and that they were kind of condemning her for not forgiving, was the fact that he's never taken responsibility for murdering.
Right.
And
But see, I would never ask somebody to forgive someone else. If I know in my heart the resentment and the anger is eating me,
correct.
I will write forgiveness in a journal to rid myself of the anger and the upset. I would be doing it for me, not for OJ, not for what happened in the past, but to relieve the resentment I'm carrying so I don't get sick from it.
Correct. And so
Don't
that's,
they have to take responsibility
well, no,
before you can forgive them?
so what Joyce is saying is that if somebody doesn't do that, if someone doesn't take responsibility, we still have an ability, and especially again, if it is weighing us down, if it's ruining our lives, we still have the ability to forgive if that's what we need to do in order to have a healthy life. What
Yes.
what Joyce is saying is she would never tell someone that they have to forgive somebody.
Never.
Joyce's decision to say, look, I'm forgiving that person, even though they didn't ask for forgiveness. And I've done that before.
Move on.
I've had people who, you know, I've kind of felt they should apologize to me for something. They haven't done it. And I don't I'm
You're not carrying it.
not waiting for the apology anymore. And if the person wants to establish a relationship with me again, I'm not going to say, well, I'm not talking to you because you never apologized to me. But that was my choice. I wouldn't tell somebody that they have to do the same thing.
Right. And you're not saying they did right.
Right. Right.
No,
And,
you're just saying you forgive
and
him.
there's no question that Jacob here tries to make amends with his brother. And
Yes.
the only thing he can do is he can pay him off financially for what he feels, maybe what Esau would feel, maybe what he in his heart feels, Jacob feels he can do for his brother, which is give him stuff. Because again, if the blessing that he had gotten from his father was essentially material things, and Esau cared about the material things, then at least giving him some of his material things would make Esau feel better. If it's only a material blessing, which of course it's not. It's a
And
spiritual.
hopefully it would make Jacob feel better.
And again, and hopefully they did. Could Jacob and Esau have not had this reconciliation? Who knows? Would they have fought? Who knows? What we do know is that Jacob wants his brother to forgive him. So
Yes.
a different situation, which is that he's seeking forgiveness. And it seems as though his brother forgives him here. And his brother, at least at this point, is saying, I don't need your stuff. Now, the question of what really happens with their relationship, let's read a little bit more today.
Okay.
We'll see what happens with this reconciliation. So we don't have to read too much more for you to see it, but let's look. He says to him, please accept my present, which has been brought to you, for God has favored me and I have plenty. And when he urged him, he accepted. So eventually Esau accepts the gift. And Esau says, let us start on our journey and I will proceed at your pace. So let's continue to walk to where you're going to go. And I'm going to go with you. I'll go at your pace. But he said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail and that the flocks and herds which are nursing are a care to me. If they are driven hard a single day, all the flocks will die. So Jacob says to him, I can't really go very fast because I have all these flocks and I have these children here. And I can't really walk back with you. And he says, let my Lord go on ahead of his servant while I travel slowly at the pace of the cattle before me and at the pace of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir, which is where the area, Seir is where Esau lives. That's Esau's home area. So he lives in Seir, which is in modern day Jordan, in that southern part of Jordan, across the way from Eilat, from near the Dead Sea and the Red Sea, and in that area of southern Israel and now southern Jordan. Then Esau said, let me assign to you some of the people who are with me. But he said, oh no, my Lord is too kind to me. Oh no, my Lord is too kind to me. Let's say it like that. So Esau started back that day on his way to Seir. And so when they split up now, Esau says to him, let me send some of my people with you. But Jacob says, no. You don't have to be that nice. And he says again, and sachen be'enei, you don't need to be that favorable. It's that same word, matzachen be'enai, to find favor in your eyes. So the phrase is there even when you don't see it because they didn't translate it. How do they translate it, Mary, in the King James?
Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord.
Yeah. So at least the King James they translated it as grace or favor. They didn't say you're being too kind to me, which is definitely the meaning of it. But of that repetition of the word, matzachen be'enai, to find favor in your eyes. They should have translated it, is what I'm saying. It's not a great translation. It's not translated well. It's translated with the meaning, but not with the beauty and with the repetition of this phrase, which is look favorably on me by not, now he says, look favorably by not doing that. So it's very interesting. Jacob is trying to say to his brother, you know what? I don't need your help. And so there definitely seems to be a sense that even though they've made up, that Jacob is like, you know what? Let's not do this. And so what is Jacob doing here? Maybe he's not so sure that Esau's motivations are pure. Maybe he's still scared of Esau a little bit. So even though they've made up, let's see what happens.
He's saying maybe. I'll do it my way. I'll do it myself.
I'll do it, maybe not near you.
I like to have control over me.
Yep. But Jacob journeyed on to Sukkot and built a house for himself and made stalls for his cattle. And that's why the place was called Sukkot. And we know what a sukkah is, right? It's a hut. And so he came to a place that we now call Sukkot, or they called Sukkot back in those days. Why? Because he made a hut, a house. He built a sukkah and a house and stalls for the cattle. So he took care of his stuff there that time. Maybe it wasn't a permanent place, but it was a place where he stayed. And it says, Jacob arrived safe in the city of Shechem, which is the land of Canaan, having come thus from Padan Aram, which is Syria, and he encamped before the city of Shechem. And
Aram is that Iran,
nope, it's Aram, it's Syria. It's modern day Syria.
Syria.
Aram is Syria. The parcel of land where he pitched his tent, he purchased from the kin of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 kasitas. It says how much he paid for it, 100 kasitas, which is not a lot of money. And he set up an altar there and he called it El Elohei Yisrael. And that is the end of the chapter. The next chapter is the story of Dina, which we're not going to read today, my friends, because it's too much. It'll blow our minds, but we're not, it's okay. We're not done yet, because let's look back at what just happened. Jacob and Esau just forgave each other, or Esau forgave his brother. They reconciled. They do not hang out.
They don't hang out.
Jacob never went to Seir. It says where Jacob went. He went to Sukkot, stopped there, and then he went to Shechem and stayed there. And that's what it says. He made his journey to the land of Canaan. He came to Padan Aram. He went to his place. He went his way. His brother went back to his place. He did not go back with him. So there's a reconciliation,
As long as they're on separate terms.
but they do not spend time together after. So what we have is brothers who make up. They forgive each other. There's not, they don't hurt each other. They also, they don't go the whole way. They don't go the whole distance. They don't hang out together. Their families do not hang out together. And that's the interesting thing that happens, which is there's no killing, they don't fight, there's no bloodshed, at least now between Jacob and Esau. Later on, the descendants of Jacob and Esau will fight against each other. We fight against Esau's descendants, the Edomites. They become one of our enemies. Not our worst enemy, but an enemy. They're not our people, that's for sure. And so these brothers do not become one people. Esau has his people, the Edomites, and we have our people. Jacob has the Israelites. They are not the same people. They're all grandsons. They're all grandsons of Abraham. More, they're all sons of Isaac. We're not B'nai Abraham. We're not B'nai Yitzhak. We're B'nai Israel. We're the children of Israel. And we are not within the same grouping, the same family, if you will, the same people, the same as the Edomites. They are a different people. Doesn't mean that they're all bad people, but they're not our people. And so this is a break of the two peoples. We are not done with the Edomites. As I said, with the descendants of Esau, we're going to hear about them in a couple chapters. We actually have a whole line. I'll show you right here. We're not going to read it today, but we have a whole line we have a whole chapter of their people. I mean, chapter 36 is the line of Edom. This is Esau. This is Esau's family. We have this whole list of people. It's a whole chapter in Genesis. A whole chapter. I mean, literally. I mean, you want to talk about a chapter of the Torah that I really didn't need to have? Chapter 36, Genesis. I don't care who Esau's descendants are, but our ancestors did.
But it really doesn't make sense that it's in the Torah.
What?
It doesn't make sense. That chapter's in the Torah.
And we have it. And here
It
we
doesn't
go.
make sense though.
How
I
do
don't.
you-
I wonder why. I wonder what the thinking behind the editors were to include that.
Well, what we can say at the very least is that the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, were important enough to us that we had to record there.
At one time, I guess they were important. Yeah.
And
But
so,
what can that mean for us now? What can we learn from that separation, the difference of peoples, and what's going on in our world now? Is there
You can
anything?
pick your
we
nose,
can-
but you can't pick your family.
oh my gosh,
No, it doesn't go like that.
no.
That's true.
I know.
You're right.
So listen, no, but
No,
Mike's point is this: there are families that split off from each other at
yes,
certain times, and the family is no longer a family anymore. Look, it's very interesting how that happens. And again, all of us can think of our own family histories where, we used to see our cousins, and at a certain point it got too big, or the cousins, there was a falling out or whatever, and then the family
They
stopped.
stole $50,000.
Stop. But yes, there are sometimes financial reasons. But look, at some point, a family is the family structure is held together by people who want to be together, right? And so, thankfully, I am still friends with our cousins. My cousins we have mutual all grandparents. We have three, my father, my aunt, and my other aunt all have kids, and we all hang out together. We have Passover together. We don't hang out all the time, but have Passover, and we have Hanukkah together, and we still have holidays. And now all of those cousins, we all have kids now. So we do family stuff together. At some point, the cousins might split up, right? We might go to our different ways. We all live in California, which is very unusual.
Right.
There's 7 cousins. There was a time when some of them lived in Arizona and they moved back, but all of our cousin group, we all live in Southern California. So it's very easy. That's part of it, is that you live close by and you live in the same area, which today, by the way, isn't it because you necessarily all have to be together or work together, which is what families used to oftentimes do, is they had businesses together, right? But now it's also a factor of whether people can have a job in the same place. Well, look, we all live in Southern California. We're all happy. We want to live in Southern California still.
but can we look at the Russian-Ukraine situation
So
and see there in Ukraine, there are Russians and there are Ukrainians in other countries. Is there a way to relate it to that? I've been trying to make sense of what's going on in the world now.
So if you look at those are interesting issues, right? Of the ethnic makeups of people. I will tell you something. As much as I obviously I'm trying to pay attention and I care about what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, I will tell you I'm more concerned about what's happening in our own country, because at a certain point, if the people in this country don't see each other as common enough,
Right.
common that we see each other as separate Americas. That's the thing that worries me the most,
That's what
because
happened.
again, at some point, and again, there are real histories between Russia and Ukraine that are different. There are histories there that are essentially, some of them are unified and some of them are very different. Look, there's enough Ukrainian history that's different that enough Ukrainians think that they should not be part of Russia. But I will tell you that the question of what we have in our country is a deeply meaningful debate, because we have to still see ourselves as one country. As
Right.
one, saw a story today about people flying flags that only have 29 states on them.
Really?
Look it up. I don't want to get into it right now because it's a whole nother discussion, but I
Okay.
just saw the article today about it. Those kinds of things are deeply troubling to me because even though they're symbolic, they actually tell you something about what people feel, and the symbols carry meaning to them, right? They're people die over those kinds of things.
Yes.
I will tell you that there's another really important thing here in the Torah, which we will get to, I hope, all together, is that in the rest of the book of Genesis, so we're about 3/4 of the way, or 2/3 of the way through Genesis right now. We're in chapter 34, about to start 34. There's 50 chapters. So you do the math. There's
All
about
right.
16 chapters left. So it's about 2/3 of the way. Let's say 2/3. At this point, with Jacob and his brother, there's forgiveness, but they aren't able to live together.
Separate.
Yes.
That's far better than the first brothers, Cain and Abel, kill each other.
Right.
Far better than other stories that we know of where brothers despise each other and can't even look at each other.
Right.
But it's not the same as what we're going to see at the end of this book of Genesis.
Okay.
Don't want to ruin it for you, but I want you to remember this because you do know it. In the story of Joseph, we have a brother, Joseph, who's almost killed by 10 of his brothers. They throw him in a pit and they were going to kill him. They actually said they were going to kill him. And as you know, as you remember, the end of the story of Joseph and his brothers, he forgives his brothers. And not only does he forgive his brothers, and his brothers are amazed that he forgives them because he has the power as the second in command to Pharaoh to kill them. He could have killed them and no one would have batted an eye.
Right.
Nothing. He could have completely killed them. They were completely at his mercy. And not only does he not kill them, he says to them, I forgive you. And he says, not only I forgive you, but he tells them, come and live in Egypt because I have everything here and you can come live with me and I will take care of you and you will be my friends and brothers and we will live together here in Egypt. And they survive together and they live together and they go back. Of course, they become slaves, but then they go back together as the tribes. But what they do is they don't only forgive each other, but they also live together and they love
Yes.
together. And they do something that Jacob and Esau, their father and uncle, couldn't do, which is not only forgive, but able to love each other afterwards.
Yes.
And that is what doesn't happen yet. We're 2/3 of the way there. We're 2/3 of the way there physically in the book, and we're 2/3 of the way there emotionally and spiritually, because there is another level of forgiveness, which is beyond just saying, hey, you know what? I don't hate that person anymore. It's the ability to actually be with them, be in their family, be in their sphere, be in their lives, and say, you know what? We had a horrible time. We didn't grow up well together, which is what Joseph and his brothers must have said. Oh, you remember how much we hated you? You hated us. We hated each other. But now we live together. And this is the highest level of forgiveness. This is what people should aspire to, is not just being able to say,
Right.
I can tolerate this person, or I'm not going to kill him next time I see him, which is what Jacob and Esau seem to have reached, this mutual recognition of the other person's space. Just stay out of my space.
Got it.
That is not what the highest level of forgiveness is, because the highest level of forgiveness is you can be with the person and be with them and love them and care for them and take care of them. And it's not just, I can tolerate you, or you go to your side and I go to my side. Well, let's just keep it apart. And that's all we have at this point. They went different ways.
Got it.
And to me, that's the question of whether we can, again, at some point right now, especially again in this country, whether we can get to that point where we're working together with people who we don't agree with and who we're different from, but we recognize that we can't just tolerate each other. but we have to be able to work together and live together, because these people who we don't agree with about things are our neighbors. They don't live in another state necessarily.
But there's no tolerance.
Yeah, well, right now, we're not
Here,
even,
there's no
right now, we're getting perilously away from Jacob and Esau.
Yeah,
They tolerated each other and went to their different places and said, I'll stay on my side of the wall and you stay on the other. Because again, you can do that. You can have a neighbor where, you don't like the guy or the woman, and you say, you stay on your side of the wall and I'll stay on my side of the wall.
uh-huh,
Just keep away. But when we can actually be in each other's homes, even though we have different values or we have different ways of doing things, and our problems are right now are pretty significant, because there are a lot of people who don't even want to be in the same room with people they don't agree with. So
right.
I think we've got a long way to go right now, because we might have stepped back to even behind where Jacob and Esau were, or where at least they'll tolerate each other on the other side of the wall. So we're that's what I'm really concerned about. I'm really concerned about us. And again, it's not that I'm not concerned about Russia like everybody else. By the way, I just want to tell you one thing. When I went to Ukraine 33 years ago, I went to Russia and Ukraine. I spent more time in Ukraine than in Russia, just because the trip I was on, I was visiting with Jews who were not being able to leave the country. It was the last days of the Soviet Union, and I was visiting with refuseniks, and I spent 4 days in Odessa and 4 days in Kiev. And then I spent a couple of days in St. Petersburg and a couple of days in Moscow. But it was mainly like 2/3 of the time was in Ukraine. So I was in Ukraine, I was in Kiev, and I was in Odessa, which used to have huge Jewish communities. Kiev was right by where a lot of our families lived. If we lived in the area around Belarus or around Minsk or Pinsk or all those places are within sphere of Kiev. So a lot of us have families that came from that area, even if they're not from Ukraine, by the way, just so you know. When your families left there, they were all Russia. It was all Russia. It was all the Russian Empire. At the time, Poland was part of the Russian Empire in the 1880s. So when my family that came from Poland came out of that area, it said Russian Empire, even though they were from Poland. So
Right.
all Russia at the time. Russia controlled Ukraine during the time that our families left.
Right.
But when I was there in 89, the Ukrainians were starting to, the Soviet Union was collapsing, and Ukraine was starting to assert its own independence. It was not independent yet, but it was going to be 3 years later. And what was interesting is I would talk to some of the Jews there, and the Jews who were living in Ukraine at the time were very worried about Ukrainian independence, because the last time Ukrainians were independent was a brief period during World War II, where the Nazis took over the Ukraine and turned it over to Ukraine. And what they did was murder every Jew they could get their hands on.
Yes,
I am not telling you that I hate
that's true.
because of that, but I will tell you that the Ukrainians were very anti-Semitic and were partly that way because they felt a lot of the Russian Jews were communists. So part of it had to do with that. And part of it just had to do with hundreds and hundreds of years of Ukrainians being looking at Jews like they were wealthier, and that they were the middle class, and they were in many cases peasants who were not treated well, and in some cases felt that Jews were being treated better than they were. I will tell you that the Jews that I met with in Ukraine, almost every one of them said, "I'm very worried about what happens when Ukraine becomes independent." And they knew it was going to happen. It was inevitable. And they were very worried about it. I said, "So why are you saying that?" He said, "Because they're starting to teach Ukrainian history in the schools, and they're starting to teach Ukrainian language in the schools, which to me is the same as, it's like 90% Russian anyways. Ukrainian and Russian are so similar, it's ridiculous. But they're different languages, and they're very similar, but they're different. But I will tell you that the Ukrainian Jews, the Jews who lived in Ukraine, were very worried about that history and about what that meant, because it was very anti-Semitic, and it was very, very filled with a history where they were worried that if it was reasserted, that they would be the bad guys in it. And I said this story. I told you when I was in Kiev, they have a statue in the center of Kiev to Bogdan Khmelnytsky. Bogdan Khmelnytsky was the murderer who killed at least 1 million Jews. His troops, his Cossacks, went through Ukraine when they had a slight time of independence in the 1600s from Russia, and they killed, again, every Jew that they could find. The Khmelnytsky pogroms, they were called. You can look up the Khmelnytsky pogroms. Bogdan Khmelnytsky was literally a Hitler before Hitler. And he killed over 1 million Jews in the name of Ukrainian independence. Well, what was interesting about it was that here in Ukraine, in Kiev, there's a statue of Khmelnytsky, and I saw the statue. To me, they look at him like, oh, George Washington, and for us, he was a Hitler.
Right.
And so the reason that Khmelnytsky was even tolerated, by the way, by the Soviet Union is because one of the things that Khmelnytsky did is that when he killed the Jews, he also killed Poles who controlled, just so you know, in the 1600s, Poland controlled a good chunk of Ukraine. One of the things, and by the way, Poland let the Jews have a wonderful life, which is why so many Jews lived in Poland, but they were not very good to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians took it out on the Poles and the Jews. What happened was Khmelnytsky signed a peace treaty with the Russians, the Russian Empire, and because of that, the Soviets liked Khmelnytsky because he was a figure of Russian-Ukrainian cooperation. And so because he was so pro-Russian, Khmelnytsky, they tolerated that kind of Ukrainian independence. I will tell you that it is much more complicated than most of us are going to. You probably some of you don't even care about what I just told you, but I will tell you that as Jews, most of us would not have been happy with Ukraine. With the Ukrainians. I will tell you that it's not the case today, that during much of Ukraine's resurgence in the last 30 years, Jews have not been murdered.
You also have to remember Zelensky's a Jew.
Correct. And the prime minister that we're talking about is actually a Ukrainian Jew. So it has not been bad for the Jews of Ukraine. Ukrainian Jews have been pretty well treated, just as they've been treated very well by Russia, by the way. Putin has been a very, very strong advocate for Jewish resurgence in Russia. He's supported Jewish activity in Russia, the establishment of Jewish synagogues and Jewish community centers. What?
The Jews.
Yes, but Putin has been supportive of Jews.
Right minds.
Yes, but he's also been supportive of Israel, which is very important because, in all fairness, it doesn't really matter what Ukraine says about Israel. It very much matters what Russia says about Israel. And again, that's not why we should let Russia control Ukraine. I'm not arguing that. As a matter of fact, I don't want Russia to be able to assert itself in Ukraine. But I will tell you, it should not necessarily, if you want to know it from a Jewish perspective, it should not necessarily keep us up at night. As somebody who doesn't want to see Russians roll tanks into another country, that should upset us. But as Jews, don't just understand, you do not need to root for the Ukrainians based on anything that they've done for us in Jewish history. But yes, but we do not want Russia to be able to roll over into any other country. But I will tell you, it's also, the history is much more complex. And I will tell you that the last time the Ukrainians had that power during World War II, it was terrible, absolutely terrible for the Jews. Understand that the Nazis would write back to Germany about how brutal the Ukrainians were and could not understand how these people killed with such brutality. Not that the Nazis were good people, they were horrible. They literally said to their own officers, to their own people back in Germany, these people want to kill Jews way too much. And they couldn't even understand it. So it was a problem. It was a real problem. Some people that came to America after World War II that were Ukrainian concentration camp guards and murderers came to this country. People like Ivan Demanyuk, Ivan the Terrible, these people were Ukrainian nationals who were given guns by the Nazis and who only too willingly killed Jews. So I don't want any Ukrainian to tell me that I'm telling something bad about Ukraine. I'm telling you the truth about Ukraine. I don't want Ukraine to be a Soviet, a new Russian satellite like they were during the Soviet Union. But I also tell you, they were responsible for tremendous brutality against the Jewish people in the 1600s, in the 1700s, in the 1800s, and into the 1900s. Have they done it in the 2000s? No. I want to be clear about that. The Ukrainians have not done it in the 2000s. But for most of the last 400 years, not a good situation. And I'm not laughing over I'm laughing how ironic it is that we're now in a situation where we're kind of defending Ukraine.
So in other words, you're saying you want them to stay on their side.
I do. I want them to leave us alone. I want them to treat Jews well everywhere. I don't want Jews in Ukraine to be afraid, and I don't want Jews in Russia to be afraid. But I will tell you, when you hear Jews in Russia talk about this, understand when they're not so upset about it, understand why they're not so upset about it. I don't want, and I've seen some very interesting op-ed pieces from Jews who are basically saying, don't be so eager to run to the defense of into the defense of Ukraine, including, by the way, Thomas Friedman, who's hardly a person who, Thomas Friedman, by the way, for those who don't know, has been, the main foreign politics writer for the New York Times for 35, 40 years now.
Right.
Thomas Friedman has said, this is a lot more complex, and is not defending the Russians, but is also saying, before we go crazy here, let's look at the whole story. So for those who want to read that, who want to read Thomas Friedman's piece, you're gonna get somebody who knows a lot about politics, who again is not somebody who you'd expect to do that. And I will tell you, the piece is it was 2 days ago. It's called "This is Putin's War, but America and NATO aren't innocent bystanders." And he basically argues that, we've kind of put Russia into this situation a little bit, and we should be a little bit more careful. His final sentence is, when Putin felt humiliated by the West after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the expansion of NATO, he responded, "I'll show you, I'll beat up Ukraine." Yes, it's more complicated than that, but my point is this. This is Putin's war. He's a bad leader for Russia and its neighbors, but America and NATO are not just innocent bystanders in his evolution. So understand that when we talk about whether Ukraine should be part of NATO, that's kind of what he's talking about. So everybody, I hope you all stay safe. I hope the world stays safe. I hope we as a country can forgive each other. And to pick up on what Joy said, I hope that
I forgive you, Rabbi.
family, thank you. I forgive you. I forgive you as well. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good seeing you all.
Take care.
Bye, Mary. See you in a few minutes.
Love you, Joyce.
Bye. Bye.